You're live.
Lower.
Oh, Dan's here.
This is Senate Transportation, and we're back working on H 488. And we have a section that 25 that deals with railroads, and it's indicated to me that John Dunleavy is going to kick us off.
Oh, hold on. You're muted, John. Oh.
I think John is muted.
Section 25 is it, right? One of the green ones, I think.
It's not,
Where is it?
yeah,
Looks like he's trying to unmute, but it's not happening.
Search.
Oh, I think it's
Did you-
27. Lease extension
27.
on page
Yeah, it's
33.
27 on 33.
Oh.
On our agenda, it is so
what page?
30.
There you are.
33. On our agenda, it lists railroads as 25. So
Is that wrong? Section 33, I should write.
No,
27,
page 33.
page 33.
Okay.
Good morning, Senator Westman and members of the committee. Can you hear me now?
We
Yes.
can hear you, John.
Good. I just wanted to explain that because of federal
First,
regulation of railroads, it's not a normal landlord-tenant relationship. Basically, the federal government has regulated railroads since the 1880s. For the first few decades, it was focused on fairness of railroad rates. And then in 1920, Congress added federal regulation of construction of new railroads, abandonment of railroads, railroad leases, trackage rights, and so forth. And what this means is that when you have a federally licensed incumbent railroad carrier, as we do here in Vermont with the various operating companies, if a lease expires, we can't just go to court and evict them. We would theoretically have to go and get permission from the Federal Surface Transportation Board before we could do it. Which is a very cumbersome process, and the federal STB is very unlikely to approve it as long as the carrier is fulfilling its common carrier obligations. If we have a disagreement about the terms of the lease, there is a process by which we could request the STB to arbitrate the terms of a new lease extension. Again, that's a complicated process. I could get down into the weeds, but the long and short of it is it's just not a normal landlord-tenant relationship. It's infused with this whole federal oversight. So the fact that a lease may be coming up for expiration does not have the significance that it does in a normal landlord-tenant relationship because of the federal regulation, which is focused on whether or not the incumbent carrier is providing the required services. And my recollection of the change that was made last year was that the legislature, and I think it was the Senate Transportation Committee, as it was then constituted, wanted to pare down the statute to make it better reflect reality.
The majority of this committee is trying to learn. 4 of the 5 of us were not on this committee over the last 2 years. And so we're trying to learn, and there is interest in, there was some question about why that change was made at the point it was. So that's just where we are. So, Dan, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Senator. So It was additional to the very complicated process of actually becoming a railroad, operating a railroad at the federal level. The lease document is protecting the state a bit because it it transfers some of the responsibility that the STB requires and the FRA requires, and it puts it on the actual railroad carrier, and it takes it off Vermont as the property owner. So, um, the lease does that and protects the state of Vermont. But I think the change, as John said, sort of brings it into reality, and it also makes it more consistent across the agency. For instance, we don't require at our airports, which I'm very familiar with. Probably a good example I could give would be if we lease airport operations out to fixed-based operators that don't require legislative approval. So, we do that all the time. And it's very similar here where we're leasing out the operation of property that we own to the railroad. And so it's very similar. I mean, it's just, I think the change last year actually made us more consistent with where we are across the agency. So I guess that would be my 2 cents. I guess if there's any questions about what the leases are, I can try to answer them if that is part of the question.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Dan, do you remember when that was originally added to the statute, or do you know any of that history of asking for legislative approval? Like, was there a time when it wasn't and then it was added and then we took it out last year, or Mr. Donnelly?
John might know that one. It was before my time.
Yeah, I think that language actually went back to 1963, back when the state first got involved in in acquiring the old Rutland Railroad properties for continued operation. And it was a much different setup in those days because the state-owned railroad properties were administered by the old Public Service Board, which was a independent regulatory board. This is before they split up the regulation and the advocacy functions. And the original legislation wanted to make sure that the Public Service Board did things with the approval of both the governor and the legislature for certain major operations. And also, so that was one concern back then. I mean, that's changed now because the leases are being administered by the Agency of Transportation, which is a regular executive branch agency. And the other fact is that at the federal level, the whole scope of federal preemption has been increased in recent decades, particularly since the 1980s.
More questions? Go ahead.
Well, I guess my recollection of what happened in the last session was that the agency had a very short time frame to renew an existing lease. I think it was the Little Whacker, and that was the reason that the agency proposed not including the legislature in that process. Was that they didn't have time to do what they needed to do to renew the lease, which I don't think is that great of a reason. Because what's the time frame of these leases? Typical time frames, 40 years, something like that, 30 years.
They differ. The Little Whacker that was done last year has 3 consecutive 10-year terms, so it goes for 30 more years. So that'll go till 2054. And then, for example, like the VTR on the western side of the state, that goes to 2054 as well, but it didn't start last year. So that the total length of that agreement is 60 years. So it differs. They're not all the same.
Okay. So they're decades.
10-year, essentially 10-year renewals on each one.
Okay. And then what provisions are in the leases other than railroad operations? like subleases?
So the leases cover basically who's responsible for maintenance operations, who's responsible. Well, there's a couple things in there. There's rent, obviously, how much they pay us.
Right? Now, is that regulated by the federal government, the rent?
No, that's more regulated by reality on what railroads make per car across the country. I mean,
Okay.
it's sort of an industry more standard than anything. We want, I mean, our goal is to have railroads be successful. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean they make millions and millions of dollars more than they should, but we also don't want to make the rent so high that we don't have a railroad operating. So there is definitely a fine line.
Okay, but that's not regulated by the federal government.
The rent is not, no.
Okay, and what about subleases?
So I'm not exact if you're talking about like a building that is in control.
I'm talking about the railroad having subleases of that property.
I need more context. Like you can't just have another railroad just come run their trains on
There's
this
not,
railroad.
there are subleases, and that would be something that this committee could talk about if you want to, but it would be helpful if you could explain those.
The leases authorize the railroads to execute subleases with shippers. In other words, if they want to lease a sidetrack to a particular shipper for loading and unloading, they can do that because that's part of their, I mean, that's how they function. There has to be a place where shippers can load and receive freight. So the railroads have authority over that. Leases for non-shipper leases, the state does those directly.
Okay, then the state has an interest in that, and the legislature would have an interest in that.
Well, indirectly, but bear in mind that there are dozens and dozens of such leases. I mean, it's not administratively practical, and it never was required to get legislative approval for each of those leases. I mean, Dan probably knows better than I do, but I'm sure there are hundreds of outstanding leases with non-shipper leases. It's a considerable administrative responsibility.
What about fiber optic leases?
The lease with the railroad provides that the revenues from those are shared 50-50 between the operating railroad and the state. There is such a lease on the VTR between Rutland and Burlington. I don't recall. I think there might be one for a short segment in Bellows Falls, 500 or 600 feet. The line from White River Junction to Wells River, the previous railroad retained the fiber optics authority, so we don't have the authority to lease that.
How many railroad leases are there?
Well, there are 4 operating leases. There's the Vermont Railway for Hoosick Junction to Burlington, Green Mountain Railroad from Bellows Falls to Burlington, the Little Walker from in the Barre Montpelier area, and then the Connecticut River Line, which is also part of the Walker from White River Junction up to Newport. So there's four operating leases, which is what this is about, this language.
Yep. That's what, go ahead.
And either Dan or Michelle, because I think you were here a lot on this discussion last year. The way I remember it was not that we were running out of time. When we were here, we could have approved the lease. So it wasn't that we didn't have time to approve the lease. It was just like, we're going to go through the process of approving a lease. Do we want to continue to have legislative oversight of this? It hasn't, for all the reasons already stated about federal preemption and what we can do. And basically, is it within the agency? Do we trust the agency to do it, or do we want to have us review and have it go through the full legislative process each time? That was more the question than the task.
There were multiple questions, and when I suggested that we not pursue that. The explanation that was given in this room was that there wasn't time for the legislature to be involved. But I mean, that's one of the reasons that was said. I mean, I can get the text.
Yeah, to answer that question, I think we had time. It was tight, but I don't think the reason this passed was because we didn't have time. That wasn't the issue. I think the issue was it wasn't necessarily efficient or needed, because of the preemption and the ability for the state to govern some of this stuff on railroads, because we just don't have that authority. It's at the federal level.
There's some authority you don't have, and then there's other authority that the state does have. And that was not made clear last year. And I can get you the testimony if you like from last year on the urgency.
Was it, and maybe it was about the bill, not that we didn't, because you could pass a bill today if you need to. But maybe it was something about other time. Yeah, I don't remember the time.
So do either one of you have anything more you'd like to add?
Well, Senator, just to follow up on the last point, my recollection that last year's legislation also required the agency to provide advance notification to the legislature when these leases are up for renewal, so that there can be, I forget exactly how much advance notice, maybe Dan remembers, but because there wasn't an established protocol for that. So I believe that was in the last year's legislation.
I don't recall the time. There was an advance notice discussion. I don't remember what that was.
That first.
Because I thought that was kind of part of the compromise when we talked about it last year, was like, well, we could review the lead and then we could weigh in so that they don't do it for the sign there.
4 leases, 10 years, it's not going to be a burden for the legislature to see them.
I asked Damien to pull the language out. So. All right. Well, thank you guys both. And you'll hear back from us.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. Jeremy.
Are we moving on from that topic?
Yep.
Can I ask Senator Harrison a question?
Absolutely.
So it would be good to, like, if you say like this is the kind of things that you think the legislature would.
I think the fiber optic leases, the way that railroads operate with no barriers, and actually it totally makes sense for the federal government to require that we have similar operations, because railroads have to move between states. I mean, that's so logical. And one of the benefits of moving between states is that they have a completely connected right of way that is not, there's no 90-degree turns. The up and down is very controlled, which is perfect for fiber optic. It's extremely valuable, and the state should be the legislature should be part of that conversation.
Is that the only one that is the fiber optic?
No, I'm sure it's not the only one, but it's enough of one to it be worth our time. I support it.
It would be good if we had an example, like you feel like the current leases were not well negotiated.
I don't know that. I've asked for the leases. I don't get them. I mean, we had that issue last year too. So they're also public records and they're public documents.
But right, is that still the case, Michelle, that you won't release the leases?
No, we're happy to release the leases, and we received Senator Harrison's request over the weekend or
On Friday.
Like Friday, yeah. My staff were working on getting that information, and I think there was the matter of determining if there was any confidential information. They didn't think there was, so I'm not sure where the gap came. So I'm asking that question right now.
Because I'm just all, my concern is that what happens is it gets bogged down into very local issues. And we kind of just so a single legislature can say like, this train going through my town, I want this to happen. And they could, use that very parochial view to hold up a multi-state rail network. And that's what my concern
Okay.
by having the executive branch, trusting them with the greater good of the state doing it. So if you had examples of like, they didn't do a good job, that's why the legislature needs to oversee their work. But I haven't seen that example yet.
Okay, so we need to see the leases.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that example, they probably couldn't, if like, and it'd be great to have more of a conversation about this when we're not in a hurry. Like quiet zones, I mean, there's a lot of things that local folks are interested in. Most of those are regulated by the federal government. I mean, in my area, we have areas where propane tanks are they're basically stored on a,
Right. So
yeah, pretty close to houses. And so I've had to explain to people that that's something that the state can't do anything about. So I think it would be helpful to have those conversations more clearly and openly with the public. And explain that the tanks are made really well so that they're it's very hard to explode them. I don't want to release it.
That's a discussion that's been going on forever, and
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe the new people have moved in, but everybody, I mean, that I know, this goes way back, is apprised of that situation. How well the tech, we actually used to have testimony on construction of rail.
Yeah.
Cars and stuff.
These are actually people who have been here for generations, but the rail operations changed and they started putting the tanks in this certain location.
In a certain location.
Yeah,
Because it's been done for years, maybe
Right.
not in that location.
Right.
So, we'll look for some leases to show up. We will have to, in the next draft, if, Damien comes back with, decide whether this is in or out. All right, you have issues with what is in front of the committee on section 3.
Correct. Yeah, so thank you, Chair. Just speaking to section 3, I think Damien walked through it yesterday morning. And in general, we don't have a problem, informing the committee's jurisdiction, but we think this expands that quite a bit. So I just want to start with generally how our funding works. So virtually never do we get within 1% of our planned federal funding. Okay. There's an appropriation that is assigned through the IIJA, but then Federal Highway holds a portion of that back and then releases it in what's called August redistribution. And so how much they hold back is dependent on the year. I've been told it can be as low as 7%, but recently it's been closer to 15 to 16%. And then we get that back kind of in a end of federal fiscal year fire drill called August redistribution. But even within that, landing within 1% of the program is a rarity. And so what we have concerns with principally is section 3 or parenthetical 3 within section 3. The proposed changes to any project authorized in fiscal year 26. It goes on, but this sort of sets up a 4 times a year 10G reporting requirement, because it's not contingent on necessarily the project being delayed or being altered strictly because of federal funding. It is just if there's a delay or change as I read it, we would need to report that the times highlighted, and this committee, we've talked about how nobody really uses the 10G reports. And we're moving towards more of a dashboard programmatically. But I think the current language would add quite a burden to basically produce those 10G reports on a 3 times or 4 times a year interval. Additionally, there's no threshold. So any change would have to be reported. So effectively, we would be publishing the white book 4 times a year, altering either estimates and or advertising dates. The next provision that we find problematic is parenthetical 5B. And this is the 1% and actually requires JTOC approval for implementation. And again, as I understand the current process is Secretary of Administration goes to the Joint Fiscal Committee, but we don't necessarily go to JTOC every time our federal funds change by 1%, because again, that would be annually. So again, this would add a what would be a likely 3 times a year JTOC meeting as a matter of course to basically affirm what we've been doing for decades.
So under statute now, if there's an adjustment of more than 1%, you are under statute required to go before joint fiscal. So how is this different than that?
So I'll defer to the appropriation members on that, but what I'm being told is we satisfy that through Secretary of Administration, looking at federal funding as a whole, not per program.
Hasn't come up.
What's that?
Hasn't come up before that.
No,
I don't remember it either.
you know, the issue really here is with federal funding in flux across the board, and in that looking, we we want to make sure that we're apprised and in front of decisions that are made, major decisions about construction, and as it narrows, I'll take, for example, the year that we're in. We've got rescissions that are coming up. We've got revenues that are down. We we may have some language in our bill about to balance. All of the stuff on our own revenue sides are are looking down. They aren't looking up, they're looking down. And we've got a number of things that are on hold. Most of them we hope will be approved, but with what's going on, we don't know. I don't think the intent here is to have you redo your reports multiple times during the year, but what we want to be in front of is before decisions are final about shifts that need to be made because of less federal funds and downgrades in revenue. Would we how do we stay on top of that?
Sure.
And so it's that on top of, and there is some requirement around the 1%, whether you in total or that require that. The other difficulty on the state revenue side is we're coming off a winter that we're gonna get an update from maintenance when we get past the detail, but I would doubt there's any extra money left in maintenance after the winter we've had. We have the flexibility around purely state dollars to do things is not great within the agency. It's a very narrow path. And So how do we stay on top of these?
I guess I would offer that as I interpret what is currently written, it doesn't address state funds at all. It is strictly related to federal funds. So we could have a pretty significant swing in state funds that would not trigger any reporting requirement. So I can appreciate the concern, but I don't think this achieved that objective. As I interpret what's written, it basically adds a fairly high administrative burden for what is, just general business. I would also add that the grants that have been reviewed have not resulted in any project delays, because when we developed the transportation program, NEVI aside, we very let me back up. We don't program and progress projects that can't be progressed absent a grant. So the grant is on top of that we would then, backfill in additional projects. So, as an example, when we put together a transportation program, historic practice was to actually program 110, 115% of the appropriation, knowing there were going to be natural delays. We'd have projects ready to fill in those natural delays. We've gotten better at delivering projects, and there are, again, that August redistribution has reduced our predictable apportionment. So we've scaled that back. So the 26 transportation program is actually basically right at apportionment. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying we would be reporting every project change, but none of it would be predicated on a change in, or none of it strictly would be predicated on a change in federal funding. Because that's just the way the system works.
Well, I think we've got some struggling to do with the language then to figure out how we don't get left behind in and ahead of time know how things are changing and the uneasiness, and I'll speak just for myself in this, my uneasiness is we've got federal projects on hold, we've got anemic revenues, and there doesn't look to be any upside here. So how do I say to my colleagues that we're on top of what's being proposed to make shifts that all look like all the indicators are on the downside? It's quite another when if you've got a transportation fund that on the revenue side for the with state dollars, everything looks on the upswing.
Yep.
And when you have things come along like infrastructure bills coming that happened just a few years ago, where there's an increase in federal dollars coming and you're matching up to that, you don't end up with a book that turns out that you have to cut projects out of, and we have people that are our counterparts in this legislature call up and say, why did my project get cut? So we're caught in the middle.
Understood, and I fully appreciate the perspective. I think we could establish some check-in, but compelling us to update project status 4 times a year is a pretty heavy lift. I don't know how we can maybe establish some thresholds around that. Certainly, if state funds are the driver and transportation revenues are down, I think that was the original intent of the agency's kind of September 15th check-in to say, okay, this is how we balance the previous fiscal year. But at that point, we're just the federal fiscal year is just coming into focus. So essentially, the June 30, September 30, and the June 30 and the December 15 check-in dates would undoubtedly show a reduction in federal funding every year by design. And we would not probably have any projects adjusted because of that. We wait for August redistributions. And if we have to true something up, because we're allowed to use advanced construction, which is a cash flow mechanism we use, we would true it up in the next program. We wouldn't, in all likelihood, make a mid-year adjustment.
Well, what happens in the mid-year when you do? And in a place where we're now in, all the indicators on the downside, and I will say up to this point, the federal projects, other than the particular area around NEVI, that is, those are gone, but we still have a bunch of projects that are on hold.
Well, the projects aren't on hold. The grant is under review, but the more and more we hear.
My terminology is not the best.
Right, but I just want to clarify that.
It's not, they are on hold, and it's not go full steam into this.
The grants or the projects?
The grants.
Correct. We are continuing to receive information from Federal Highway that says they fully expect these grants to be executed as awarded up to and including NEVI. Now, we don't know exactly what that'll look like with NEVI because as Secretary Duffy said, they fully intend to appropriate the funds as Congress intended, but they want basically to review the plans. So that aside, all the other grants we've received, every indication is we are getting those and we are progressing those projects forward. I guess what I would say is I haven't ever been made aware of a mid-year funding derived program adjustment, right? Because we've got some tools to span years and most of our projects span years. I'm not saying it hasn't occurred, but typically we would just, when we come up with the next state fiscal year program, make those adjustments to true that up. And we're doing that right now, where you can compare FY25 and FY26, you'll see a significantly smaller program to help true up from those inflation costs that we absorbed in the preceding years.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Jeremy, I really respect your perspective and I understand the administrative burden. Perhaps this language might result in, I'm very in favor of this language. The two reasons I'm in favor of it is first, we're in uncharted, unknown times. And I think having the legislature be as informed as possible will only benefit the agency. So I think that that's true, whether you disagree or not. Fair. That's just different perspectives. The second thing is I think we've had a mismatch of ability to have legislators navigate the process of where is money going, what's happening. And this is the same rationale that we started the 10G report. And I know that you said that we don't really use it and it's not valuable. Well, it is valuable. And maybe it's not the right format of the report, but I really hope that you can take back the feedback that we've given you today. I want us to move forward with the language. And if it's administratively burdensome and it's not serving the purpose that we have hoped that it would, then we can change it. But I think unfortunately we've had this dynamic where legislators are unable to even be a part of the conversation because we're not informed. And whether that's purposeful or not, I think that's what has ultimately come to pass. And this is the first step in writing that. And I really appreciate in your role as chair that you've taken this on because I think this will only serve us. And I understand that you know, we're asking you to do something, and that's never, that's never going to be an easy, hey, yeah, give us more work. But I think this work will have value, even if you disagree, and it will have value for folks who are in a position of leadership when we are ultimately faced with the continuing cuts by the federal government. So I think we're in new charted territory, and there's actually a really big opportunity for us to resolve longstanding mismatch of communication on our finances. So I respect your perspective, but ultimately I support the language it's written and would vote for it.
So if I could, I wasn't saying they weren't useful. I was just reiterating what this committee had told me last time I testified on the 10G reports and when we decided to come back to the dashboards. And I guess I would just offer that I don't know that we're in uncharted territory, because as of today, we don't think we're going to lose any federal funds. Now, I can't speak for anything outside federal highway, but you know, we're not changing any project. We're going full steam ahead. This program is not being executed any different than years past.
Go ahead.
I agree with the intent of the language, which is basically to notify us when something bad
Sure.
is happening.
Yep.
And maybe something bad needs to be made more general. And because there could be situations that aren't funding related. It could be that the way that we do things might be impacted by federal rules. I mean, it's really impossible to project, especially now.
Mhm.
So we might want to have more general language
Sure.
and flexible language, and maybe you could suggest something.
And I don't think we'd be at all opposed to saying, you know, for whatever reason, X went sideways, here's how we're responding. That would be, I think, agreeable to us.
And I would ask that it be more proactive and so that when you're aware of a situation that could be problematic,
Mhm.
that you would let us know. Just in like the next feasible time frame, a couple of years. But then I think eventually you should have a permanent language that makes sense. So maybe the 1% isn't the right threshold either. So, but that's a different
But
topic.
the
But I don't-
1% is in statute now.
Yeah, so maybe we look at that again, but not now.
But
Federal fund.
if for state funding, and if we are beyond that, they're required to bring it in front of joint fiscal. I think what you hear is there's a desire here to struggle with this language, and we hope that we can get you to help. We don't want to be administratively burdensome. What we do want is the information to be able to alert and work with our colleagues to make sure they understand what's happening and how we're having to move around each of those things. So
I think that would make us better partners to you as well. Like, I think that's the bottom line, is this is a way for us to have a better partnership with the agency versus what seems to happen is changes happen and then we react and the reaction is negative because we weren't given prior understanding of the circumstances. So I think this would actually be, although it is an ask, a really big benefit to the relationship that is developed between the agency and the legislature. So
Yeah, and I guess I don't fundamentally disagree with that. The question is, how do we have that interaction? Because right now, effectively, what we would do is essentially have to, as a matter of business, 4 times a year, update the transportation program in a fairly voluminous effort. Every time a schedule changed, regardless of the cause of that change.
there's got to be a way to alert us to what
Yep.
the shifts are in projects and what's going on that doesn't require you to put together the books again,
Sure.
but will let us know who's whose project's at risk. So you will be hearing from the two behind and we're gonna be looking to
Yeah, and maybe this is something in addition to the sort of dashboard 10G notion that there's a notification that goes along with that. So it isn't so passive that somebody would have to log in and see it, but maybe we could just say, okay, here are the projects that have been delayed for any number of reasons. And then if this assembly wanted more information, we could then provide
And
that.
as somebody that's a longtime member on joint fiscal, it's a different level when somebody from an agency or a department comes in and alerts us to what's happening. It's a whole different process. And quite frankly, one of the things about JTAC is the chair of finance, the chair of ways and means, the chair of the two appropriations committees, along with the chairs of transportation, have to sit and listen to what financially is going on. And we're not in a good place.
Yeah.
So how do we get that group of people within the legislature into a place where they get a feel for what the shifts are that's going on within the agency? And I think we've made it clear that things don't look good.
So could I suggest that we separate project by project changes regardless of the cause versus programmatic financial struggles, and sort of suggest that, okay, if there's an increased briefing frequency related on program-wide financial status and outlook, that can be handled separately from project updates that may have environmental or right-of-way delays that wouldn't necessarily be in any way tied to sort of the financial outlook of either state or federal
I
funds.
think we'd be amenable to start to talk about that. One, I'm going to give you my exception. We've got a book that says that, and I'm going to use my old language, my Shimco language.
Yep.
We're moving $7 million into that.
Yep.
When I start looking at the rescissions that are going to have to be made, I look at a downturn in revenue that it is going on. That's one of the few pots that's all state dollars. And as we sit here and we're about to approve a budget that has 123 miles of paved road, that's one of the only places that you can go to fill the potholes. And if what we do is approve a budget that looks like I've got a Shimco that has been increased, which will help me deal with the little crises that we might have. If I leave here and then that is the only place to cut the money, I'm like, oh, damn.
Right.
And it creates a situation, where do I go
Right.
to do? And so I think being aware of that and thinking about all of that is really important for us to struggle with.
Sure. And I'm happy to have sort of a dialogue, how to make you informed of those decisions and the state. I would just point out that the current language won't address any of that.
We're struggling to find
Understood.
and let's find something practical that works for all of us.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think it might make sense to, I mean, we can tweak the language as the chair sees fit, but I think we should move forward with the language. And then if there is a better alternative that we learn through the process, we can come back next year and resolve it.
Mhm. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think, and Jimmy, you've been here, through, Jamie represents the, public transit agencies. Yeah, I think he's our last to wrap up for today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Jimmy Finn on behalf of the Vermont Public Transportation Association. Jim Mullen had to drop up, otherwise he'd be joining us as well. But on behalf of the VPJ, I just want to note the time that the committee and all of you as members have given transit in the context of this T-bill. It really is compared to past years, quite a difference. It's immeasurable. I can't even put a finger on it, but we do appreciate your time. You've seen us appear a lot of times in various contexts, and we even took the time to prepare a comprehensive memo that had maybe 10 or so recommendations, and we realized some were in a couple of buckets, short-term, immediate steps, and some might take a little bit longer term to germinate. And the VPTA fully supports what the committee has currently under draft in the T-bill. We think that, not only will provide for some immediate steps, but as I say, also for continued actions and discussions. If I could go to the well one more time on one particular issue, if you recall in, I think, the joint hearing, Caleb Grant from RCT was talking about how we try to utilize on our end the ability for those individuals enrolled in demand response programs, the ability to use, one vehicle for shared rides to try to, maximize that one vehicle, have better efficiencies, and at the top of the list, reduce as much cost as possible rather than having multiple trips and sometimes going to the same location, same day, same week, etc. We do the best we can on our side, but sometimes we're given a day or a time or an appointment. It would be great if we could have some sort of stakeholder process that would bring the agencies that administer the demand response programs, the VPTA and the hospital association, to say, how can we look at better coordinating and scheduling demand response appointments so that if we do have 3 appointments going to an opioid treatment, let's put them in the same vehicle as opposed to 3 different vehicles. As one example, dialysis, et cetera. I think we'll capture the vast majority of providers through the hospital system, but it's at least a very good start to try to have that conversation. And I'm hopeful that having the agency of transportation or someone kind of convene us, that all the voices will get the table and we can come up with some solutions. Absolutely legislative action that we're happy to report back with some steps that you're going to be able to find.
So you would envision hospital association.
Hospital, I would envision VTrans convening a stakeholder group comprised of DIVA, Hospital Association, and the VPTA to discuss better coordination, facilitation of scheduling of appointments for individuals enrolled in the demand response program, something like that.
Beautiful. Yeah, let's just include the methadone clinics, because I think they're totally separate from the hospitals. And then also the dialysis, because I think some are with hospitals, but some are separate.
I wasn't sure who felt.
Right, but let's right now just include everyone as much as possible.
This is,
I think that's a great idea.
real money.
No, it's huge. And it's actually better for the people too, because then there's some camaraderie. Can I say something else?
Sure.
The report that you guys put together in like 5 days was really, really good. I mean, it was excellent, and thank you. And just keep doing that. I mean, maybe we should ask for everything in a week, but I'm kind of joking, but kind of not. But and when we start talking about revenues, because that's the next thing is we really need to figure out revenues. We can use that kind of urgency, productivity. But it was a really, really good report, and that meeting was wonderful. And I'm just so glad that the 2 chairs thought to get together and just because the 2 systems are really important to each other. So really, really good job.
Wouldn't have happened without your invitation and resources.
It was really good.
Did you get all that?
So what I got, I apologize because I'm multitasking here, is that we're looking for language asking the VPTA, Hospitals Association, and the others to look at scheduling appointments in such a way as to reduce trips required by volunteer drivers. That's essentially the gist of it.
Yeah, we can learn some.
I think
Yeah. Yeah.
And the
the
others
suggestion
include-
was that the agency call this group together.
Do you feel that the agency has, I mean, will the others pay attention, like the methadone folks and the dialysis folks? I mean,
I think it's helpful that it will be in statute, directing them to collaborate with us on this, but they are entities that are not. Some of them are entities that are not overseen by the legislature, so, you know, we have to recognize that as well. I think from the perspective of the fact that, what you heard from the hospitals and healthcare centers last week, and what we regularly see in terms of what happens when their clients don't get the ride they need or miss it or whatever, I think it's in their best interest as well from a cost perspective to be participating in this. So hopefully they'll see it that way as well.
Yeah. And we can help you individually if you need help.
Absolutely.
I might connect you with. Okay. I think we're done for the morning.